Hi everyone, it's Alexis with Project Management Made Simple. In this video, I'm going to answer the question, can changes be brought into the sprint once the sprint has started? So depending on the Scrum Master or the Agile coach that you speak to, the answer might be immediately no. Absolutely not. Once the sprint has started, we are not to incorporate any changes. It's going to be too disruptive to our sprint plan. But there's some things that I would coach you all to consider before immediately saying no. Now, there may be some instances where no is the answer, but the answer to this question is not an absolute no. Actually, contrary to what some may believe, there are some factors that are to be considered before we answer this question. Now, let's first reference the Scrum Guide and see what the Scrum Guide has to say about changes coming in during the middle of the sprint. So the Scrum Guide says, no changes are made that would endanger the sprint goal. Quality does not decrease. The product backlog is refined as needed, and scope may be clarified and renegotiated with the product owner as more is learned. So with those 4 points in mind, I'm going to place an emphasis on point number 1 and point number 4. And so when we look at point number 1, we're really asking ourselves the question, are these changes going to, or is this change going to endanger the sprint goal? If the answer is yes, well then the answer to, if we bring it into the sprint, more than likely is going to be immediately no. And something I'd like to preface this conversation with is that the responsibility of answering this question lies with the team. The Scrum Master may be the person who is asking these questions of the team, but ultimately the answer of bringing something into the sprint, yes or no, is a team decision. It is not a decision that is made by the Scrum Master. So moving into the next point, we'll want to ask ourselves, what is the level of effort to complete this unplanned change? Is this a small change? Is this a bigger change? This is a conversation that really stirs the developers to have a better understanding of what the change is. Because oftentimes what happens is when I've worked with teams where they say, oh, this is such a small change, they're usually quick to jump at it and want to, make the resolution and complete whatever the item is. But the idea here of asking these questions, of considering these factors before bringing something into the sprint that has been unplanned, is to take a pause and see how this is going to affect our sprint plan. And so part of that is understanding the scope of the work, and in understanding that, it's how long do we think that this is going to take. We also want to understand how this is going to affect other work that we already have planned in the sprint. The thinking is that when we set our sprint plan, we had a good idea of what's to come for the given iteration or for the given sprint that we're working within. And so if we're now bringing in this unplanned work, how does this affect what we've already had planned? If we're a team, especially who's working with multiple users or multiple stakeholders, then if we have work planned for other stakeholders and we're now swapping it out for this work, that then needs to be a conversation with that stakeholder group. And so I really want to emphasize here that when asking this question, we want to consider these various factors that can then have a domino effect. So something else we want to consider is, where did this request originate? What type of request is this? Is this a production support request? Is it a feature request that can potentially wait later on? Having a better understanding of where it originated can help us once we get to the retrospective, and we can take a look at, why are these requests coming in the middle of the sprint? Is there some way that we can prevent this from happening? Is there some type of agreement that we need to have with our stakeholders so that their expectations of when something can be addressed are acknowledged and are outlined? Typically, when we're working on something like production support, in general, if it's a critical issue, we are going to bring that into the sprint. We are going to address that. However, if we are seeing this consistently happening where we're having production bugs, then we want to get to the root cause of what's happening. We want to get to the root cause of why that's the case and resolve that. And if it's feature requests that we are receiving, well, then it could be a conversation to align our stakeholders to our sprint cadence so they can have an understanding of when we do things like backlog refinement, when our sprint starts, bringing them into our sprint review so that they can be heavily ingrained into the process. And again, this helps with managing their expectations. If we have a stakeholder coming to us during the middle of a sprint asking for something, what I've witnessed a lot of with teams can be a hesitation to say no. They want to service their customers, but ultimately there can be an impact to other work and therefore to other customers if we don't consider these factors before we say yes. And another factor the team will want to consider is their capacity to finish. So my teams work in 3-week sprint cadences. If we are on day 12 of the sprint, meaning we have 3 more days remaining, and we've asked these questions and assessed that this particular request is going to bleed over into another sprint, well then maybe we ask the question of, could this just wait until the next sprint? Again, considering if this is a production bug, well, that's a different case, but if this is a feature request, looking at ways that we can mitigate bringing this into the sprint, but of course considering these other factors, and one of those things being, do we actually have the time to complete this? Because if we don't have the time to complete this, well then we might find ourselves in a situation where we're doing a bit of replanning and swapping things out when we could simply wait a few days and handle it in our sprint planning session. This is a video answering the question, can work be brought into a sprint once the sprint has started? The answer to this question, as I said earlier, is not an absolute no, but I would advise teams to strongly consider the factors and questions that I've listed in this video to help them make an informed answer and have an informed decision on if the answer should be yes or no. I want to thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please do give it a thumbs up. I have a playlist where I talk about all things Agile and Scrum, so if you're interested in that, I'll have the playlist linked below, and I will talk to you all in my next video.